everyone, I'm Amir Devi of Patentlawyer.io, and I just read Intellectual Ventures versus Motorola Mobility, decided by the Federal Circuit on May 31st, 2017. Today I'm going to give you a general overview of the case, including the reasoning behind the court's decision. This case involves pre-AIA law, where the patent holder attempted to swear behind a Section 102E reference. Although it involves pre-AIA law, these issues may still come up in your practice. This case presents two main takeaways for practitioners. First, the board cannot construe the claims broadly for claim construction purposes, and then narrowly for swear-behind purposes. As we'll see, that is exactly what the board did in this case. They construed the claims broadly so that the claims would read on the prior art, and then they required the patent holder to corroborate narrower limitations that were not in the original claim construction. The second takeaway is that the board cannot summarily dismiss evidence because the evidence is dated after the critical date the patent holder is trying to swear behind. The rule of reason requires the board to consider all evidence that is relevant. In this case, the Federal Circuit held that the board erred because they summarily excluded a document that was dated a month after the filing date of the 102E reference. Please note that this case is non-precedential. Let me begin by giving you the background of the case and how it reached the Federal Circuit. The patent at issue is U.S. Patent Number 7382771. The 771 patent discloses a mobile wireless hotspot that has both long-range wireless internet access and a local wireless hotspot. For mobile hotspots, a wired hotspot was necessary because IEEE 802.11 only supported short-range communications. This would be fine in a cafe because the hotspot could have a wired internet connection, but this would not work in a car or an airplane where a wired internet connection is not possible. The 771 patent's mobile wireless hotspot discloses a long-range wireless internet access, allowing the mobile wireless hotspot to connect to the internet wirelessly. The mobile wireless hotspot, in turn, provides client devices in the vicinity of the wireless hotspot with internet access. Now, Intellectual Ventures acquired the 771 patent and asserted the 771 patent against Motorola Mobility in the Southern District of Florida. Motorola Mobility, in response, requested that the board institute an inter-party review of the claims 1 through 4, 7, and 18 of the 771 patent. The District Court of Florida stayed the case pending resolution of the IPR. The board instituted IPR relying upon the Bone reference, qualifying as prior art under Section 102E, based on a filing predating the 771 patent by about 4 months. During the IPR, Intellectual Ventures presented testimony and corroborating evidence to swear behind the Bone reference, demonstrating that the inventors made and tested a mobile wireless hotspot system having all of the claimed features before the Bone filing date. In its final written decision in inter-party review, the board held that Intellectual Ventures' challenged claims were unpatentable based on allegedly prior art. Intellectual Ventures appealed to the Federal Circuit, contending that it had conceived of the invention in the 771 patent and introduced it to practice before the filing date of the Bone reference. The Federal Circuit ended up vacating and remanding because, according to the Federal Circuit, the board erred in its legal analysis. Now, let's discuss the Federal Circuit analysis and reasoning. There are two main limitations at issue in this case: the LAN routing system limitation and the standalone system limitation. So let's first look at the part of the opinion that's related to the LAN routing system limitation. Regarding the LAN routing system limitation, the Federal Circuit found the board erred in its analysis of whether there was prior conception of the LAN routing system limitation for two reasons. First, the board incorrectly construed the claims broadly for claim construction purposes, and then narrowly for swear-behind purposes. The board improperly required intellectual ventures to corroborate conception of authentication and control features during IPR, but the board had expressly rejected a construction that would have included authentication and control features. The Federal Circuit cited in re NTP, quote, "We agree that it would be improper to apply one claim construction to evidence of date of invention and a different one in assessing the prior art references," end quote. Because the board had rejected a construction that would have included both authentication and control features, the Federal Circuit determined that the board had erred in requiring corroboration of those same features. Let's turn to the second reason. The second reason was the board was overly dismissive in refusing to consider evidence presented during IPR. The excluded evidence had to do with a credibility issue that arose with respect to testimony that Intellectual Ventures presented. During IPR, Intellectual Ventures presented testimony from the inventor, Mr. LeBlanc, that the invention was reduced to practice using a standard version of Windows 98 that had local dynamic host configuration protocol, or DHCP, functionality. Intellectual Ventures provided evidence showing that the version of Windows 98 used by the inventors had the local DHCP functionality. Motorola attempted to exclude the evidence under Federal Rules of Evidence 402 as not being relevant. The board refused to consider this evidence altogether, siding with Motorola because Intellectual Ventures did not show that the inventors knew of and intended to use those functions. They put on expert testimony of a doctor that testified that Windows 98 included certain functionalities based on the expert's personal experience. But the board also refused to consider the expert's testimony because the expert had reviewed some material that was prepared by the inventor, Mr. LeBlanc. The Federal Circuit acknowledged, in its opinion, that the testimony provided by the expert was not direct evidence corroborating conception because, of course, Windows 98 was not part of the claimed invention. But the board was too dismissive of the evidence, according to the Federal Circuit. The Federal Circuit found the board erred by refusing to consider this evidence because, under the rule of reason analysis, the board was required to consider all pertinent evidence. Now let's turn to the part of the opinion that's related to the standalone system limitation. The Federal Circuit found that the board erred in its analysis of whether there was prior conception of the standalone system limitation for two reasons. First, the board should have considered a troubleshooting guide for the mobile hotspot invention, which was a main piece of conception evidence that Intellectual Ventures presented. The troubleshooting guide, entered as Exhibit 2020, was created on December 13, 2002. Now, the phone application was filed on November 4, 2002. So the board reasoned that the troubleshooting guide did not corroborate timely conception because the troubleshooting guide was created roughly 1 month after the critical date of November 4, 2002. The Federal Circuit again noted that the rule of reason standard requires consideration of all pertinent evidence. The opinion cites the 2010 decision of Lazar, where the Federal Circuit held that documents created shortly after the critical date and even undated documents may be relevant to corroborate an inventor's testimony. Hence, the Federal Circuit held that the board's complete failure to even consider the troubleshooting guide was an error. Let's turn to the second reason. The second reason is that the board should have considered the product guides disclosing features of Windows 98. If you recall, Intellectual Ventures corroborated conception of the standalone limitation by presenting product guides as evidence. Now, the product guides showed that Windows 98 had DHCP and also network address translation features, or NAT. The board improperly refused to consider the product guides because according to the board, the inventor, Mr. LeBlanc, only testified that he used Windows 98 and that Windows 98 had the DHCP and NAT features. The board did not consider the evidence because Mr. LeBlanc did not testify that he selected and used Windows 98 for the DHCP and NAT features. The Federal Circuit held that the rule of reason required the board to have considered the product guides as well. The Federal Circuit vacated its determination of no prior conception and remanded the case for further proceedings. Now, just to recap, the two main takeaways in this case are: one, the board has to apply the same construction for swear-behind purposes, and two, even evidence that is dated after the critical date may still be relevant for swear-behind purposes and cannot be summarily excluded by the board. The objective of this video is to give you a general overview of the case without injecting my own biases. But if you wish, please argue the merits of the case in the comment section below. If you are interested, the opening brief, the answer brief, and the reply brief are all available for download in the link below. Feel free to submit your comments as well. Thank you for watching.